you have no confidence in self, you are twice defeated in the race of life. A people without knowledge of their past, history, origin, and culture is like a tree without roots. Liberate the minds of men, and ultimately you will liberate the bodies of men. Men who are earnest, but not afraid of their consequences. They try to put my soul in a black hole, but didn't realize this melanin is gold. That's why I shine with this little light of mine. Let's go, let's go, let's go, let's go, let's go, let's go, let's go. Let's get it. You're now tuned into Civics for the Culture, hosted by me, Bennie, aka Poeticlee Williams. Once again, we're here to discuss some information. Look, I'm not a lawyer, I'm not a politician. However, I'm someone just like you that can be that can educate themselves, educate yourself, enlighten yourself, and put yourself on insight and information that's here to kind of give us some game on what's going on in this country, what's going on throughout this system and governments, and how that's hindered people of color, how that's kind of put us in a way where you have redlining, where you have killings by police, and it's not just coincidental. It's something where you have a system of slave patrols, but we're not gonna get into all that right now. If you stay if you listen to the episodes, I hope that you're learning something. I hope that you're going back and you're like, whoa, this happened? Yeah, it happened. This is real life. It's not just a movie. This is real life. And that's what I'm here to bring you throughout the week right here on Watch LOTUS X. You can follow me at Poeticlee, Poeticlee, and you can follow on watch on YouTube, on Instagram, listen on SoundCloud, listen pretty much anywhere that they have podcasts. So now that all that's out the way, let's get to the real juice and meat of this episode, and kind of the episode that's going to string some things along on these next few episodes together in a series. What I want to do is, we're in this time period, right, where we've let go the notion that we're just going to trust the government, right? We've let go this notion that we're just going to fall back and let this system, quote unquote, and understand what a system is, keep programming us, keep feeding us, keep housing us, keep doing all these things to us that do nothing but hinder our true growth and our history of our DNA and history of who we are as people to this planet. You know, we're kind of letting that go now. We're pushing that to the side. What we're doing now is we're evolving our minds, we're evolving our spirits, and because we are our ancestors' priority. We're here to do ancestors' work, to continue the work of the ancestors. And when we talk about the ancestors, we have to talk about certain revolutions, certain revolutionaries that have happened and taken place, not just on the soul. Even though I'm talking about civics for the culture, I'm talking about civics throughout globally for people of color. And when I talk about revolutions, I got to get into the Haitian Revolution. You know, the Haitian Revolution is one of the revolutions that created the first Black Republic, you know, on this Western hemisphere. And one of the revolutions that don't get talked about, but it was one of the slave, okay, you may ask, where and what is Haiti, right? So in the 18th century, Saint Dominique, which is now known as Haiti, became France's wealthiest overseas colony, largely because of its production of sugar, coffee, indigo, cotton generated by enslaved labor force, right? So on January 1st, 1804, one of the ceremonies that took place in Port-au-Prince, as got tongue tied, but Port-au-Prince, and was held by a gathering of leaders who survived the Middle Passage, survived slavery, survived revolution, survived the war. They proclaimed the independence of a new country, which they then called Haiti. The name, they believed, the original Taino inhabitants, which Taino were the indigenous people of that land in that island, Hispaniola island, had used before the Spaniards had killed them all. That was the Taino, which we're gonna have a series on here where we talk about some of the missing people of this planet, right? And so the Taino, Taino, were really the indigenous people of that land, and so they honored by calling it Haiti, which believed come from Taino, which the Spaniards had killed them all, which as colonizers typically do, right? So as we get talking about Haiti, we get to understand what is Haiti, who were the people of Haiti. This revolution is
It's deep, man. Honestly, I personally feel had some producers, some filmmakers, man, y'all sleep behind the wheel because this is a very complex revolution. I mean, when you're talking about the different revolution wars and kind of the revolutionary sparks that happen within this one package, it's major. And I think some film directors, you could have made a killer TV series. I mean, Game of Thrones, you could have made a killer TV series focusing on and really breaking down the history and being truthful and talking about all the moving parts, because you have United States, the United States plays a part in this, and how the Louisiana Purchase plays a part, and really the Haitian Revolution tightened up and kind of expanded, not kind of, but expanded slavery here in the United States. We're going to talk about that. But however, on this episode right here, what I want to do is I want to kind of get you into the pre-revolution and understand the people that were there first. Because one of the things we do is kind of jump on, we just talk about, okay, these enslaved people, they burst out and they revolted and they took over and they won. No, it's not just that simple. Let's get into the mind state, because even in during these times that we're in right now, I'm saying something, but I'm not saying something. We're moving in a time period where people are revolting against this quote unquote system. Understand the people who are here in this quote unquote system, just like the people that were in Saint Dominique during this time period. So when you look back at that time period, we're going to talk about the pre-revolution and what kind of really sparked it in the independent movement all around. But let's go to the people. So when you talk about the people, the demographics of Saint Dominique, and I'm getting this information right now. I'm reading information that is coming from blackpost.org. I'm reading information that comes from the Haitian. This is a historic essay in 4 parts that I'm going to read several different parts by Bob Corbett. And I'm going to read, I want to make sure I get all my facts here. Gotta definitely get all your facts. Can't get. And I'm also reading an article written on Slate by Edward E. Baptist. Very historian right there, Edward E. Baptist, that you definitely want to look up as well. And is that all my... Yeah, I think that's all my sources. So get into the demographics of Saint Dominique and roughly giving you from 1789 to 1790 when the revolution kind of took place and kind of sparked and took off. So when you look at the demographics, you talk about free whites. So let's talk about the whites first. So you had 2 groups of whites, right? Well, in all, first, free whites, you had about roughly an estimate of 32,000 free whites, right? Then you had free people of color, which you had an estimate about 28,000 of free people of color. And I'm going to get to describing who necessarily the free whites were, who the free people of color were. And then you had slaves, the slaves, which you had 500,000 slaves. So we're talking about a 10-to-1 ratio of from slaves to just people that weren't slaves, with roughly around 32,000 free whites, 28,000 free people of color, and then 500,000 slaves. And this was the time period of estimates between 1789 and 1790. Now, when you talk about the whites, you have 2 groups of whites. You have the planters and the petit blancs. The planters, and I'm going to read this information from Bob Corbett, who kind of gives a breakdown of these different groups, right? So these were the planters, right? These were the wealthy whites who owned plantations and had their slaves, right? They had many slaves, right? Because, I mean, you had 500,000 slaves. So, yeah, they had a lot of slaves. Since their wealth and position rest entirely on the slave economy, they were united in support of slavery, right? So they were, by the 1770s, extremely disenchanted with France. And their complaint was almost identical with the complaints that led here in North American and here in America from the British to rebel against King George in 1776, if you're educated on the history from that, to declare independence, basically. And that's basically the planters said, hey, we don't want to be under France's rule. We want to be independent. We want to own our own, right? So let's go from there. So also with the planters, virtually all the planters violated the laws of France and carried on an illegal trade, especially with the fledgling nation, the United States of America. Most of the planters leaned strongly towards independence for Saint Dominique, along with the same lines as the U.S., that is have a slave nation governing governed by white males. That's basically what the planters had in mind. All right, sounds a little kind of like here in the US, which goes to say, yeah, they wanted to run a system just like US. We want to do our own thing. We don't need to be under your guide and rule. You're over there, we're here, right? So that's the planters. That's one group of the whites. You had another group called the Petit Blancs. So the second group were, and it kind of even seems similar to this moment in time here in the United States. The second group were less powerful than the planters. They were your artisans, shopkeepers, merchants, teachers, and various middle and underclass whites, right? They had they may have had a few slaves, but were not wealthy like the planters. They tend to be less independent minded and more loyal to friends. There is that same ideal here in America. It's interesting how people and things never really change over time. So yeah, they were like, hey, we're part of this system. We're going along with the flow. You have those people that are the drivers, which are the planters. Then you have those people that are passengers going along with the flow. And that's the Petit Blancs. So, however, even with all that being said, they were committed to slavery, and were especially anti-black, seeing free persons of color as serious economic and social competitors. You got to understand that they were already a little like that these other white people were above them. So to see anybody free, a black person free, who they themselves could have as a slave, to put them on an equal level, just the same here in the United States, was a no-no. So that was your Petit Blancs, the second set of white people in that two group of Saint Dominique, which is now known as Haiti. So now those are kind of the ideals we've talked about in the Jim Crow etiquette of that, how that even that is here in America, how you have one sort of class, you have one section of class that believes, feels, walks around with this etiquette, this sense of aura, this confidence that I am better than you because I own, because your ancestry could be slave under me. There is that mind state here. Then you have that next class that doesn't really have it like that and can be possibly under you. However, just because of the color of their skin, they feel like they're better than you. Things don't really change. So when we start to talk about the free persons of color in Saint Dominique, we're talking about mulattoes. And we're talking about, you have free persons of color that were wealthy, right? We're going to talk about that. And then you had the black slaves, which you had several different groups of black slaves. And that's why I wanted to talk about more of this before we got straight into the revolution, because the people understand the people there first, because the people make the revolution, right? The revolution doesn't just happen. People make it. People are fed up. And it's always more than just one reason why somebody is fed up. It's more than just one cause, one striving for one reason. There are different reasons, and people form different alliances that you never thought would happen. Let's get into that. So the free blacks that you had there were the mulattoes, right? They were treated special by fathers because they were, well, let's get into what the mulatto was, because you may not know what a mulatto is. So the mulattoes there you had were a mix of children who were children of Frenchmen and slave women. So let me get right there. So there were approximately about 30,000 free persons of color in 1789, about approximately, and about half of them, I said earlier 28, got the numbers mixed up. So around 30,000 free persons of color in 1789. About half of them were mulattoes, children of white Frenchmen and slave women. These mulattoes were often freed by their father masters in some sort of parental guilt, look here, I'm your dad, I'm the master, I can't have you necessarily be a slave. You know what I'm saying? It just doesn't feel right. Probably made their soul. Probably they had a hint of heart that probably hurt somewhere deep in there. So these mulatto children were usually feared by the slaves since their masters often displayed unpredictable behavior towards them. At times, recognizing them as their children and demanding special treatment, at other times, wishing to deny their existence. Thus, the slaves wanted nothing to do with the mulattoes if possible. And I don't blame you, because look, if you're going to walk around like you're special, or the master may treat you special at times, but then may switch it up, I don't want to deal with you, because that is too wishy-washy for me. Plus, come on. We got to be all in this together. The other half of the free persons were were black slaves who had purchased their own freedom or had been given freedom by their masters for various reasons. Now let's start again talking about these black people, because I think these black people are the same black. You see this this mindset actually travel overseas in a sense here in America, and we're going to talk about how these are the same black people that exist today. So the free black people, the free people of color, were often quite wealthy, certainly usually more wealthy than the petite blancs. And remember, your petite blancs are your teachers, your shoe keepers, your people that have the middle class, right? They don't own pretty much like the other free whites, like your slave owners, like not slave owners, but like your real planters. And often were the free people of color were often more wealthy than the planters. Check that out. I'm gonna read that one more time. And often even more wealthy than the planters. Come on now. But what did this start to create? The free persons of color could own plantations and owned a large portion of the slaves as well. And they often treated slaves poorly and almost always wanted to draw distinct lines between themselves and slaves. Free people of color were usually strongly pro-slavery. And you still see that mindset today of people that get of color that get in certain positions. Like, look here, no, I'm trying to be like the whites. You other people, nah, you can't let it happen. You got to stay down there because I made it out. It's on you now. And you can only be one of us. You know what I'm saying? You always saw that here. Even in America, it's a thing where certain limelights, it can only be one. It can only be on one. But why? There were special laws which limited the behavior of the free people of color, and they did not have the rights as citizens of France. Like the planters, they tended to lean towards independence and wish for a free Saint Dominique, which would have been really a slave nation in which they could be free and independent citizens. Yeah, they could be free and own slaves. The irony in that. As a class, they certainly regarded the slaves much more their enemies than they did the whites. Why was that? You felt threatened that your spot, which was a rare spot, could be taken. Insecure. Culturally, the free people of color strove to be more white than the white. So we've seen that here in America. Literally seen this here in America. And if you even go back at pictures, it's interesting how you see their clothing, how they dressed, and how they wanted to talk, how they wanted to speak the French. Even when you read right here, they denied everything about their African and black roots. They dressed as French and European. They dressed as French and European as the law would allow. They were well educated in the French manner, spoke French, and denigrated the Creole language of the slaves. They were they were Catholics and denounced the voodoo religion of Africa. While the whites treated them badly and scorned their color, they nonetheless strove to imitate everything white, seeing this is a way of separating themselves from the status of the slaves who they despised. And that is the issue. That's the sick, poisoning, toxic mind that we have to clear from ourselves in our own trauma. When you see black people putting other blacks down, you deep down resonate with those blacks that looked as that other black as a slave, and you wanted nothing to be like that. And that says more about you. What is wrong with your heart? What do you see in that mirror? I'll let you answer that if you feel offended or if you feel that way. Now, those were the free people of color in Saint Dominique, which is now known as Haiti. I'm going to keep saying that just in case there's a reference. So we're talking about the pre-revolution. Let's keep rolling. Now let's start talking about the people. As we're talking about people, let's talk about the slaves. The black slaves. There were roughly around, like we talked about, 500,000 slaves on the eve of the French Revolution. This means the slaves outnumbered the free people about 10-1. In general, the slave system in Saint Dominique was especially cruel. In the pecking order of the slavery, one of the most frightening threats to kind of send to the rest of Americas was that we will sell them to Saint Dominique. We will send your slaves to Saint Dominique because of how cruel, how nasty they treated the slaves down there. You know, when you talk about the slaves, you had the slaves split up kind of in three different sections of people. You had the domestic slaves. I want you to write this down in your notes. You had the domestic slaves, field hands, and the maroons. Let's go into it. The domestic slaves. These were about 100,000 of the slaves were domestics who worked as cooks, personal servants, and various artisans around the plantation manor or in the towns. These slaves were generally better treated than the common field hands and tended to identify more fully with their white and mulatto masters. As a class, they were longer in coming into the anti-slave revolution, and often in the early years remained loyal to their owners because, hey, shoot, they treat me good. I'm gonna treat master good. Master treat me good now. And that's the unfortunate part of that, because you still had that sickening, toxic mind which lives on today is, hey, I'm not gonna go against anything the white man says because the white man treat me good. Man, bump that. The white man still has you as a slave. And if you're still thinking, acting like that, you're still a slave today, and you got to break free. But we're not going to get to that rant today. Then next, after the domestic slaves, we had the field hands, right? So there were about 400,000 field hands, which were slaves who had the harshest and most honestly hopeless lives. They worked from sun up to sundown in the difficult climate of Saint Dominigue, which you talk about. The sun is just, we're talking about the islands, the Caribbean islands. Come on now. They were inadequately fed with virtually no medical care, not allowed to learn, read, or write, and in general treated much worse than the work animals on the plantation. So despite, check this out right here, because we're getting deep into how this, and you got to understand. So when you start talking about how we act today, understand the trauma that we've been through from centuries ago. This is real. This isn't a movie. So despite French philosophical positions which admitted the human status of slaves. So the French, their philosophical position, which admitted human status of slaves. They admitted slaves were humans, something the Spanish, United States, British systems did not do at that time. They did not admit that slaves were humans. However, the French slave owners just found it much easier to replace slaves by purchasing new ones and worrying much to preserve the lives of existing slaves. So, hey, look, man, this one's breaking down. It's like a car. Yeah, it's breaking down, got a broke arm, it's beat, it's sick, it's whatever. It's probably mentally not doing well, spiritually not doing well, but just beat it off, put it to the side. Even though we know that you're a human, we admit that you're a human. However, we're not going to treat you as a human. What does that say? What is that still saying today? Those were your field hands, the people that put their blood, sweat, and tears. Just as, and same thing is for domestic slaves as well. That's about 400,000 field hands out there. Now, you then had the set of the Maroons, right? So the Maroons was a large group of runaway slaves who retreated deep into the mountains of Saint Dominigue. They lived in small villages and they did subsistence farming and kept alive African ways, developing African architect, social relations, religion, and customs. They were bitterly in anti-slavery, but alone, and were not willing to fight for freedom. However, I'll get to that point later. They did supplement their subsistence farming with occasional raids on local plantations and maintain defense systems to resist planter forays to capture and re-enslave them. So they were like, nah, we're good out here. However, I do want to point out and say about the Maroons that they had, and when I read right here, two of the leading generals, and if I have to definitely I'll probably try to find if I can get those names as we discuss the revolution, but two of the leading generals of the early slave revolution were Maroons. So they looked out. They may have not always came to fight for the freedom and revolution, but we still have those people here today. But they may not always speak up, but hey, they got your back. They may do something slick every now and here. So that's important to note. Now, that was a lot right there. It's important to understand the people that make up systems, that make up revolutions, that make up ideals, that make up movements. Because the people that make up that movement, each represents some kind of feeling, each represents some kind of thought, each represents some kind of passion towards something that people are fed up of. And you got to understand the moving parts in that and how each one plays a part, because each one has to play for something to break out, for a revolution to happen. Everybody, there has to be several moving parts together. Has to be several cultures coming together. We're going to talk about how some of the alliances that you never thought would come together had to come together on the political and economic sides, because at the end of the day, we're fighting for something bigger than us. And that's the bigger cause to everything. So pre-revolution, and I'm going to discuss this independence movement that happened as we cap off this episode. Then the next, we'll actually get into a little bit more of the revolution and what took place. So pre-revolution, France enforced a system called the exclusive on Saint Dominique. This required that Saint Dominique sold 100% of their exports to France alone. Hell no. And purchased 100% of their imports from France alone. No. The French merchants and crown set the prices, as you can expect, for both imports and exports, and the prices were extraordinarily favorable to France, in no way competitive with world markets. Like, what are you doing? What are you doing? You're really just trying to pull, like, just really tighten the belt up on us and just drag us. Like, really? It was virtually the same system that as that which England had forced on its North American colonies, and which finally sparked the independence movements in those colonies, as you can remember. So, like the North Americans, the Saint Domingueans did not abide strictly by law. A contraband trade grew up with the British in Jamaica, and especially with the British in North America. And after the successful revolution in the you had the United States. The Americans wanted molasses from Saint Domingue for their burgeoning rum distilleries, and Saint Domingue imported huge quantities of low quality dried fish to feed the slaves. So look, they're doing business. Saint Domingue and the United States are doing business. They're saying, hey, you got the molasses for us, for our rum. You have the low quality dry fish for our slaves. We cannot mess up this relationship. We cannot. But France, you're trying to get exclusive, and that's the no right there. So nonetheless, the planters, both white and free people of color, chafed under the impression of France's exclusive. They were not having it. They were fed up. There was a growing independence movement. And in this movement, the white planters were united with the free people of color. Would you believe it? Wow. I need a Would you believe it? It was a curious alliance, as you can expect, since the whites continued to oppress the free people of color in their social lives. Like, look here. Same thing that happened here in the United States when you had a lot of black Americans go over Vietnam and fight in the war, then come right back over here to face racism. What are we really doing? What are we really fighting for, right? Don't just answer that in your free time. So they so since the whites continued to oppress the free people of color in their social life, but formed a coalition with them on the political and economic front, the Petit Blancs remained mainly outside this coalition, primarily because they were not willing to form any sort of alliance with any person of color, free or not. The Petit Blancs were avowed racist and were especially offended and threatened by elevated economic status of most of the people of color. Of course, why not? Like, how in the world can this person that can be a slave of mine have more money than me? It just doesn't make sense. It happens. It is important to note that this independence movement did not include the slaves in any way whatsoever. Those who were a party to the movement were avowed slave owners, and their vision of a free Saint Domingue was like the United States, a slave-owning nation. And that is where we'll cap this episode. And next time, we're going to get into the Haitian Revolution and how this vision of a free Saint Domingue was really a slave-owning nation, and how that really turned upside down on their heads. And I think they probably regret that. I think they regret that. But let's talk more about that. It's important to understand the people, because what are we really going to sacrifice? I will say, there's a sense of the free people of color and the planters coming together, the white planters coming together to understand the sacrifice of, hey, even the sense for the people of color to sacrifice, hey, not being treated well and socially, but we can come together on an economic and political front to fight for our independence. You'd have to make plays bigger than you sometimes. And I think that's what a lot of this going back in time, understanding history, understanding as we go through our time and understand these different moving parties that played major parts, understand the different leaders that played a part, understanding how the people formed together. That's why I want to talk about the people. Because before you can talk about any revolution, you got to talk about the people. Before we can join together any front here in the United States, I say revolutionize our minds here, we have to look around at the people here. Who is here? Who can we be alliance with? Who can be allies of ours? Who cannot? Who do we know that will be for us? Maybe in just this front, maybe not in all areas, but hey, what area can we get you to be an ally on? Doesn't have to be everything. Sometimes you got to know how to package something. And that's what they did here. And yet the slaves were still, you had some black people out here fighting for a free Saint Dominigue, yet still wanting to keep slaves. What does that tell you? It tells you a lot. And we're going to keep talking about it next time. The Haitian Revolution. This was the pre-revolution. And this is right here on Civics for the Culture. You can tune in on Watch LOTUS X. You can follow me, Poeticlee, Poeticlee. And as always, stay wise, stay strategic. And come on, let's stay tuned in. Peace.